So, yesterday we talked about the four instructions of the first tetrad focused on the body, and the second set of four instructions focused on feelings. And now we're ready to really look at the mind. So, in the tetrad on feelings, we have the last two instructions of turning towards or becoming aware of or experiencing the chitta sankhara, the activity of the mind or the mental formations, or this other intriguing translation, emotions, and kind of, observing that and then inviting that to become still, or stilling those thoughts and perhaps the feelings that come with them, at least by invitation. As we said earlier, it's not like we can actually shut them off. We can turn to something else that kind of makes them irrelevant or makes them disappear. And that can also be a really positive way to proceed. But now we're looking at the chitta itself. So looking, what is the chitta? It's the mind, it's the heart, that's the translation. What is mind and heart? Sometimes I have thought, to get some distinction around this, some discernment around this, I've thought about the chitta as the container and the chitta sankhara as the contents. I think I mentioned that yesterday as well. And then I was on retreat that Ajahn Suchita was teaching, and he talked about the mind or the chitta as a field. And I like that. It's got, it's much more expansive that way. And in this field, all kinds of things can come up, which would be the mental activity, right? But you have this field, which is the chitta. So another way to think about the chitta is to realize that even though, as I said earlier, we're using a noun, it's not actually a thing, it's a process, that the chitta itself is a process. And it's a process that doesn't end when the body dies. So you'll hear things like Ajahn Ganha say that the chitta never dies. And then you start thinking, is he talking about something eternal? No, not in that way that, we think, oh, my soul is going to go on forever, everlasting. It's not like that. This is a process. And it continues after the body dies, and it's with us now. So when we want to observe the chitta, or the word is actually experience the chitta, and we're breathing in and out, experiencing the chitta. The way the Buddha talks about this, we get some idea of what he means when we look at the Satipatthana Sutta, and he says, whether this chitta is being influenced by greed or lust, or whether it's free from greed or lust. Whether it's filled with aversion or anger or hatred or not, whether it has delusion in it or not. And excuse me, I think of those things and the other things that he mentions in that list of ways that the chitta can be disposed, you might say, or the mood or the tenor of the chitta, what's going on in there. But it's not the activity itself. It's like there are thoughts that come with that greed. There are thoughts that are in concert with that hatred or delusion, which are the chitta sankhara. But then the chitta itself, it's like, oh, the overarching influence here. What is it? Is it contract? Is the chitta contracted? Is it expansive? And so on. So this is the usual way the Buddha approaches things. First, you observe what is there. You turn towards it, you might say, and you look at what's there. What's the state of my mind? This is more important, and it's important to be honest about what it is, that this is what's important. Admitting, oh wow, this is a mind filled with lust. That's important. It's more important to have that clarity than it is to have it free. Well, that's not true. It's extremely important to have that clarity, to be honest with ourselves all the time so that we know what to do with it. And then he talks about gladdening the mind. So whatever state we find the mind in, to gladden it. And people have asked, so what's the difference between piti, sukha, which we've talked about a fair bit already today, and gladdening the mind? Well, the gladdening is that uplifting. It can be related to piti and sukha. Steve's example earlier was very good, like thinking of a time before when he experienced piti and then having that, bring the mind, bring up the piti. We can do the same thing with gladdening. What is it that makes the mind, uplifts the mind? And the 6 reflections that I mentioned yesterday, or recollections is maybe a better word, where we're recollecting the Buddha and his amazing qualities, the Dhamma, the enlightened Sangha, and the amazing qualities of the enlightened mind of ordinary people like you and me, that is possible for everyone, those qualities. And the gladdening, the uplift that comes from reflecting on your own virtue and your own generosity and the Devas, and how your virtue is like the virtue of the Devas. Your generosity is like the generosity. What caused the Deva to get reborn in the heaven realm? How did they act? How did they live? And that we have the choice to be a Deva here and now. Live like the Devas. The heart is uplifted. Our actions are pure. Our mind becomes pure. And even though the heaven realm isn't the goal that the Buddha set for us, it's nibbana. But we come a long way in purification of the mind, purification of our actions, if we think in this way. So, gladdening the mind. And of course, what you use to gladden the mind is going to depend upon, to some great degree, what you discover is the condition of the mind at the time. As we've been going through these instructions, if you go through in a linear way, you might find that the mind is already quite uplifted, and we need to just move it a little bit farther before it, tips off into Samadhi. But that's the intention. We gladden the mind, and then the mind is free to be immersed in Samadhi. And the qualities of Samadhi, just as if we talk about Samadhi, people will say, yes, right, Samadhi is the jhanas. But again, it's a good idea not to get too caught up in the definitions. But piti and sukha will be there. This is something important to remember, that those that spiritual feeling, that spiritual uplift, that doesn't go away. Even though we encountered it much earlier in the process, perhaps it's still there. Or maybe we want to focus more in on the in-breath and out-breath and increase the voltage, the level of piti and sukha. And then, if the mind can become focused, but in an open way, not tight, but open, and observing what arises. So when the mind is tranquil and we observe what arises, there might be nimitta, there might be other kinds of experience of depth, of stillness, of openness. And this is the point where if people are doing some kind of practice on jhana, that you can go into the depths of levels of jhana. It's as I mentioned yesterday, particularly when we're gladdening the mind, or even earlier in the feelings tetrad, we could kind of branch off into a deeper practice of the Brahma Viharas and use any of the 4 Brahma Viharas as a way to experience immersion and a kind of liberation of the mind. Like metta jhana, karuna jhana. The Buddha talks about this, using the Brahma Viharas as a way to really immerse the mind. And, there can be these incredibly beautiful states that arise, filling the whole body and mind. And what's the point? The point is that the mind is prepared for insight. That it's in the stillness of the mind. Like sometimes the mind just goes completely still. And not even necessarily for a very long time, even for a very short time. And even if it's only seconds, it has quite a powerful effect on the body and the mind and our potential for realization. The 4th instruction is about freeing the mind. And this is the freedom of the mind, this, experience of expansive boundlessness of the Brahma Viharas, or the experience of freedom within the jhanas. Now, I want to say that many of you, some of you anyway, have heard me report this from Ajahn Gunha last year when we were visiting. I asked him, how deep does the Samadhi need to be? And he said, not that deep. And his feeling was that we are now spending too much effort focused on sitting meditation. And we get up from sitting meditation, we're still dealing with anger, resentment, irritation, etc. And he said what we need to do is apply the mindfulness and samadhi and wisdom to our moment-to-moment experience as we work and as we do everything else in life, to be happy and at ease moment by moment. He said then there's no chance for the defilements to come in. So when we're sitting and practicing, and he said even for monastics, 2 hours a day is enough. So he's really looking at, this tendency to take long retreats and to be feeling like the only way we can really practice is many hours a day in a very kind of artificially conditioned environment. And then, it's always a big challenge. How do I go back to my normal life and carry this with me, keep these benefits? And what he's saying is, make this your normal life. And I, my experience of monastic life is it's very different from the retreat experience. You'll have people want to become nuns or want to become monks because they think they can just be on retreat all the time. And that's not the monastic life. There's a lot of work. And Ajahn Ganha is like, this is important. It's important that you have a lot of work and that you're mindful and present, and you have samadhi and wisdom while you're working. So what kind of samadhi do you have while you're doing the dishes or sweeping the floor or, handling the bills or whatever it is you're doing? And really think about that. It's like, how can you have samadhi, during your daily activity? What kind of samadhi is that? And so, really, really looking at, because a lot of times insight doesn't come while you're sitting on a cushion. It comes while you're doing other things. It comes while you're listening to a Dhamma talk. It comes while you're driving the car. It comes while you're in the shower. It comes while you're washing the dishes, just walking from here to there. But if we can keep that mindfulness going, and we can really gladden the mind in the moment. You gotta clean the toilet. Can you gladden the mind while you're cleaning the toilet? Why not? It's true. There's no opportunity for the defilements to take a hold. We can't exist in one of the Brahma Viharas or in samadhi and wisdom and mindfulness and anger, resentment, irritation, jealousy, hatred, or any of the others at the same time. Just not possible. The more we turn the mind to these beautiful states and are careful not to be suppressing feeling, that does not work. That's going to erupt in some way. So if we suppress, and we have to learn the distinction between suppression and, like I said before, having the experience of, well, I know this feeling. I don't need to turn towards it and dig through it again. I can just chalk that up to old karma and move on and gladden the mind. So like knowing the difference between that and suppressing feeling is really important. And it's subtle sometimes. So when we have feeling that needs examination, we want to be able to do that with mindfulness. The mindfulness, if we have it there all the time, the more we can bring it to bear in every situation, the more these are the causes and conditions for awakening. And it's so it's with this particular tetrad where we're really learning about the mind, and we're really conditioning the mind to be ready to develop insight. And it's beautiful. It's so inspiring to see that the Dhamma keeps coming back to the beautiful, comes back to, see, that's not quite the right way to think about it. Comes back to the wholesome, comes back to the uplifting. Not beautiful in the sensual sense. It's beautiful in the sense of purity and brightness and love. It's like, Ajahn Ganha would say, you have to love everyone. He said, more than you love yourself. He said the Buddha loved everyone more than he loved himself. And he said Jesus loved everyone more than he loved himself. And this is because at that point, there is no self. But what's the Buddha going to do? He can either like hang in the cave like a Pacceka Buddha, not, really teach, which is fine. Or like he decided to really, really help living beings And then that's constant giving. And to see that this is what the Dhamma comes to. And it comes back to this all the time, every aspect. This purity of mind, this this very simple expression of stop doing things that are bad, do things that are good, and purify the mind. And that when we do that, what is it? What is left if the defilements are gone? It's love. It's caring, not in an attached way, in an equanimous, beautiful, selfless way. So you can see that in this third tetrad, we're still connected to the first two tetrads. We might need to give some of this love and attention to the body as it's ailing or aging or dying. We might give some of this love and attention to the feelings and emotions that arise. But we know that it's separate. We don't identify with it. And we don't even identify with the chitta. This too is an impersonal process. And so when we work with these steps or we work with these instructions, we can move closer and closer to that point of clear understanding of the nature of reality. And as we do, we're also creating the causes and conditions for insight to come that brings us beyond the definitions and beyond the image we have of how it will be or how it is, to a true knowing of how it is, direct experience. And once that happens at any level, whether it's recognizing that everything is falling apart, there's nothing stable in this world, and that there's nothing wrong about that, there's no reason to be unhappy about anything. It's just falling apart. And that when that's an insight, then joy arises. It's like, whoa, we don't have to be so worried about keeping it together, shoving it back up into place. It's just sliding away. And that's all right. Whether it's that, or it's like, there's nothing in this world, nothing in my mind, none of these thought activities or even the chitta itself that has any substance, any core, any identification. If we recognize the emptiness, we're free of the burden, free of trying to prop up a self. And that insight usually comes when we don't expect it. And whatever level it is, it gives us that much freedom. So when we're doing these steps or we're following these instructions, we're dropping these suggestions into the process, we're guiding it. There is a volition there. We're moving it in the positive direction, but not with an idea of controlling it. We can't control this. We have to instead be open to observing what will happen. This is an adventure. This is something that if we are curious and interested and have the energy, then more and more unfolds. It's important to notice any kind of negative thoughts negative, like, um, I can't do it. I'm getting nowhere. Doubt about ourselves. Uproot that and toss it in the garbage. And the Buddha would not have taught us if he thought we couldn't do it. He said that. This is your birthright. You have this opportunity. And whatever happens in this lifetime, if it's not complete, there will be another lifetime. Maybe not as a human being, maybe as a Deva. There'll be more opportunity. As long as we keep precepts, we'll be heading upwards. And so it's like, how can we encourage ourselves enough, encourage each other enough to keep moving in the right direction without a sense of, what I want to say, it's not like it's success or failure or a tightness around an objective. There is the goal of nibbana, but to open up to the experience that carries us there.